Hi everybody, it's Rebecca Virginia, and today I'm going to be showing you 20 Christmas and winter DIYs from 2020. First up, I have 5 sugary sweet kitchen DIYs that remind me of sugar plum fairies. The first DIY is a countdown to Christmas chalkboard. I'm beginning with this adhesive chalkboard paper and cutting board that I found at the Dollar Tree. If you spot any of this chalkboard paper, definitely grab it. I've only seen it once in like the last 2 months, and I wish that I had picked up some more. And I'm using an old gift card to smooth down that adhesive paper so that there's no crinkles or air bubbles. Then I'm taking my jute and wrapping it all the way around the handle of my cutting board. Then I found this printable on Pinterest that said Countdown to Christmas and this really pretty handwriting. And I use this basically as a stencil that I'm going to trace. You do this by printing it out, rubbing the back of it in graphite or a pencil, and then pressing it down with, I used a pen, but you could use the back of a paintbrush too if you wanted. A Cricut would definitely be a lot faster, so if you have that, feel free to use it to write down Countdown to Christmas. But if you don't, it'll just take a little bit longer, but I will link this printable down in the description box below, so you could use it as well if you would like. I'm not sure how well it will be showing up on camera, but when I remove the paper, there is a light etching of Countdown to Christmas, and then I just took one of these metallic markers, which is basically a paint pen, and I just filled in everything that I traced. I embellished the cutting board with this bright bow that reminded me of a candy cane, and then I took actual chalk and wrote out the date. So I wrote out 25. You could start it now. I'm not exactly sure how many days there are until Christmas from this moment, but I probably won't start till December 1st. Then I took one of these adorable gingerbread stickers from the Dollar Tree and I hot glued it on the side. Since I'm going to be changing out the date every single day, I wanted to have a piece of chalk close by. So I took some chalk and wrapped it in jute, and then I'm going to end up hanging it over the back of the cutting board so that it's always there when I need to change the date. With this cutting board DIY complete, your countdown to Christmas can officially begin. Next up is an adorable gingerbread cookie cutter. The first step is going to be transforming our plastic Gingerbread Man cookie cutter from the Dollar Tree and making it look like an expensive metal one. So what we're going to do is a painting technique that looks kind of complicated, but I promise it's not. We're going to first go over the entire plastic part of the cookie cutter with a gray paint. Then we're going to sponge in all different directions very haphazardly with some black paint. And once the black paint has dried, you're going to do the exact same thing, but with gray paint this time. So you're going to sponge on gray paint over it and just go in all sorts of different directions. If you have too much uniformity, it doesn't look realistic. It looks like paint rather than metal. So let that dry. And the results are pretty amazing. It really transforms that plastic into a metal looking material. Now I'm just dressing up my gingerbread man. I added a sprig of pine and these fun little berries that kind of look like candies to me. And then I made a bow out of some ribbon and a little bit of jute. I think this gingerbread man would be a perfect addition to a dessert themed tiered tray. Speaking of sweets, this Nutcracker I DIY'd looks like he stepped right off the game board of Candyland. The first thing I needed to do with this Nutcracker, especially because his outfit was really dark, was prime him. So I just took a white paint and I ended up doing, I think, about 2 coats, and I covered his entire outfit and his hat. The only part I left was his face. And you could see I took a sandwich bag and wrapped his hair up in it, kind of like a shower cap, because I didn't want it to get any paint on it. And then I just started having a lot of fun painting. I did a candy cane stripe on, I don't even know what he's holding, but I kind of wanted it to look like a rolling pin, so that's what I went with. And I just started adding lots of colors. I used paint pens to create different shapes and patterns. And really with this DIY, you get to be completely creative. There's no formula or secret or trick. Just have fun with it, use lots of colors, and have fun creating your Nutcracker. One thing I definitely recommend if you're going to recreate this DIY is to buy some of these metallic marker pens from the Crafter Square section of the Dollar Tree. I only had it in white, but I was really wishing that they made a red too, or I had found a red, because it would have made those candy cane stripes way easier. Then I tried to transform his hat into either like a cake or a cupcake, so I painted it white and added some scalloped edges all around. Then I took some glitter and sprinkled it over top. While I waited for the paint and glitter to dry down, I painted the brim of his hat a blue color, and then I started adding some sprinkles. I actually used a toothpick to do this, and I picked up some pinks and greens and blues and just added sprinkles all over his hat. This Nutcracker was so much fun to make. I don't usually use such bright colors in any of my DIYs really, so it was really fun to be creative and think outside the box on this one. My next DIY is a sugary sweet cookie sign. The first thing I did was take this wood palette from the Dollar Tree and paint it in this dark brown color. I saw this cookie company printable online and immediately knew I had to do a DIY with it. I printed it out, cut it, and then glued it down onto that wood palette. I'll also have this link below in case you want to do this DIY for yourself. It was a little tricky to smooth out the air bubbles with this card because there were spaces in the wood palette, but it is possible and I recommend doing it so you don't get those air bubbles. Now I'm just taking some white paint to distress it and make it look like snow. To hang up my sign, I'm taking some of this red wire and wrapping it around the back of that wood palette. I chose to do wire because I want it to look like a hanging sign, but I'm actually just going to lean it up in my tiered tray, and if I used jute or ribbon, then it would hang down. Now I'm embellishing it with some sparkly red bows. To help hold up the sign, I made a tripod out of candy canes. The next Christmas kitchen DIY is this delicious looking faux whip treat. I took a mug I had at home and put it down on the cardboard to trace. This is going to keep the faux whip from falling inside of the mug. Then, so I wouldn't have to use as much faux whip, I took a ping pong ball, cut it in half, and hot glued it to the center of that cardboard. Okay, now it's time to make our faux whip. I took a tub of this lightweight spackling from the Dollar Tree. It's the only kind that my Dollar Tree carried, so if you see spackling that's lightweight, it's probably that one. I added a little bit of white paint just because my spackling had a bluish hint and 1 tablespoon of water. I read on, I think it was Pinterest, that you want it to look like a Wendy's Frosty, and that is exactly the consistency that you want it to look like. Then I put it in a pastry bag and just started circling all around that cardboard circle. This is also way harder than it looks. My hands were so sore after this, so shout out to any pastry chefs or people on Etsy who make this faux whip for a living, because this stuff was work. After I went all the way around, I had a little bit extra left and there were some holes in my faux whip mountain, so I took some more and just circled around any sparse areas that I found. Here is a tip for you when embellishing your faux whip. Use red and green beads, or really any color beads, instead of sprinkles. I did a faux whip with sprinkles and the sprinkles melted and bled all over the faux whip and it came out really bad, so I had to throw that one away. But beads kind of looks like sprinkles and they won't bleed or melt into your faux whip. Then I took some little bits of cinnamon and sprinkled that over the top of the faux whip, and I found these really cute paper straws from the Dollar Tree that look like candy canes, so I stuck that in there too. I made another faux whip topping, but with chocolate looking sprinkles and a cinnamon stick instead of a straw, so there are lots of ways you can embellish this DIY. I love how all of these DIYs came out. It reminds me of the Sugar Plum Fairy from the Nutcracker. But now let's move on to some more traditional Christmas DIYs. The first DIY is a cheery holiday ornament sign decoration. To begin this DIY, I took off the metal ornament topper. Then I took some red paint and painted the ornament until the image underneath was no longer visible. This took a couple of coats. Once the paint was dry, I took some hot glue and glued the metal ornament topper back on. To decorate my ornament, I wanted green polka dots all over. So to do this, I took a foam paintbrush and I put some green paint onto the bottom of it and put down the polka dots, and then I kind of swirled it around so that the dots were larger. The good thing about using the bottom of this foam paintbrush is that all of the edges were nice and rounded, whereas if I did a paintbrush myself, I probably would not be making perfect circles. Then I took a white paint pen and I highlighted the dots all over. I wanted this ornament sign decoration to be very cartoony and colorful and kind of look like it came out of Whoville. So to further this, I took a black paint pen and then a white paint pen to highlight it, and I made dashes all around the ornament. I wanted to create a block banner going through the center of my ornament, so I am using painter's tape to lay that out, and then I took some black paint to fill in that section I had taped out. You could use chalk paint in this area. I just used regular black paint, but any color or type will also work. Then I very slowly removed the painter's tape, and it did remove a little bit of the paint pen, but none of the actual paint that I had used on the ornament or on the dots. Now I'm going to create a smaller border for that black border that I just made. So to do this, I actually measured out unlike the first time. So I'm doing a 1/4 inch. So that is going to be the border above the black. And then I took some white paint, and I first used a paintbrush, and then once that had dried, I took a foam brush because that laid the paint on a lot more thick and I didn't have to do as many coats. Using the bottom of a small paintbrush, I dipped it in some black paint to make black polka dots all along that white border. As you can see, when I peel off that painter's tape, it leaves a very thin white border which borders the larger black border, and I really like how it came out. But the painter's tape did take up a little bit of my paint pen, so I just went ahead and redid those dots that were affected. Then I went into Microsoft Word and typed out Merry Christmas in a font that I liked, and then I printed it out and placed it down. To create the stencil, you're going to take a pencil and you're going to scratch the graphite onto the back of the Merry Christmas. Then you're going to take a pen or any other hard object. You could take a pen or the back of a paintbrush, and you're going to trace out the word so that the graphite etching is left behind. I then took a white paint pen. This is from the Crafter's Square section of the Dollar Tree. They're the metallic paint markers, and they work really well, so if you see them, definitely pick them up. And then I traced out what I had wrote in the pencil, and Merry Christmas was left behind. Next up is what I think is the most fun part of this DIY, because it is organizing all the bows and picking out the colors and figuring out how you want to position them onto the ornament. Again, I wanted this to be really bright, really cheery, kind of remind you of Whoville a little bit, so I took these really bright ribbons and placed them a little bit askew off of the ornament. I also had these red sparkly chenille pipe cleaners that I got from the Dollar Tree. So I thought they would add a fun element to this DIY, so I wrapped them around a pencil to make them all curly and added them to the bow. Then once I had all the bows positioned how I liked, I hot glued it onto the ornament. And the last step was just to trim the bows a little so you could still see the Merry Christmas. And that's everything you need to do to complete your cheery holiday ornament sign decoration. The second DIY is a North Pole truck. The first thing I did in this DIY was take a bright red paint and paint the truck, excluding the wheels and the Christmas tree. I wanted this truck to be really bright, so I did 2 coats of the red paint, and then I took a sparkly metallic green and painted that on the wheel wells as well as the tree. To give the truck a more cartoon feel rather than realistic one, I painted the tires black and then went in with the red paint, and on top of the red paint, I added a little bit of white to the center of the wheels. I also did a splatter effect all across the truck as well as the tree. To make the truck even more fantastical and look like it really is going to the North Pole, I added on some glitter snowflake stickers, and then I also did snow caps on the wheel wells and added glitter to that too. I cut out a small section of this wood sign that I got from the Dollar Tree earlier in the fall, and there are some out now that say lots of different snow sayings and Christmas sayings, so this same exact type of sign is currently available at the Dollar Tree. I'm transferring the North Pole text onto my white wood sign using the same technique that I used in the ornament DIY. I'm just using a pencil and then a pen to press down the lettering onto the wood sign. Just like in the previous DIY, after you press down and remove the paper, you'll have a stencil of the wording left. This time I took a black paint pen rather than a white one, and I just wrote down over the stencil North Pole. To embellish the North Pole sign, I took a glittery reindeer sticker and put it at the front of the sign. I want the North Pole sign to hang underneath the wood truck, so to do this I'm taking small pieces of jute and first hot gluing them to the back of the wood truck. I'm hot gluing it right behind the wheels. Once I've hot glued it to the wheels, I am now going to take some hot glue on the back of that North Pole sign and lay that on top of the jute at the length that I like. The last step in this DIY is to take a piece of jute and tie it around the top of that truck so that it turns into a hanging sign. And that completes the North Pole truck DIY. Next is a super quick DIY that adds a bit of light to this Dollar Tree sign. All that we're going to be doing are drilling some holes into our really cute ho 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 sign from the Dollar Tree, and we are going to make the O's in this sign light up. So all I am doing is taking a drill and then just drilling the holes enough so that the little flame in the tea light can poke through. Once the holes are large enough to fit that flame through them, I am just attaching some tape to the front of the tea light so that it can stay secure while it is being hung. You can also hot glue this, but if you want to reuse the tea lights, you can just use the tape. And that's all we're going to do to transform this sign into a holiday light up sign DIY. I hope that you enjoyed these more traditional Christmas DIYs. And now we're going to move into some Christmas ornaments. These are smaller DIY projects that are all super quick to do. And we're going to be starting off with these really adorable gnome ornaments. They're easy to make and look so cute on the tree. The first step in this gnome ornament DIY is going to be tracing out and cutting out his hat. And I just took a spare piece of cardboard that I had lying around and drew out a triangle on it and then cut it out. For the design on my gnome's hat, I had this buffalo check scrapbooking paper, so I really liked that, so I took it out, traced it, and cut it out to go over my gnome's cardboard hat. Then I used a regular glue stick to adhere the scrapbooking paper onto the cardboard. Next up, it is time to make our gnome's beard, and I just took some yarn that I had and hot glue and added that all along the back of the cardboard hat to complete his beard. After I added all of the yarn that I wanted so that he had a nice full beard, it was time to trim it a little bit, and I did trim it at a slight angle so that it was longer in the front and shorter on the sides. To create a nose for my gnome, I am taking this white stocking that I have and sticking a white pom-pom inside of it and twisting it into a ball before securing it with a clear hair elastic. Then when I cut it, it was the perfect size for a little nose for my gnome. After trimming my gnome's beard a little bit more, it is now time to embellish his hat. And as you can see, I have some other gnome ornaments that I did. One of them had a jingle bell at the top, one had little holly berries. So for this one, I'm going to put a jingle bell at the top after I have added that burlap trim. And then I am just making an ornament hanger out of some of that yarn I used earlier. The last step to my gnome ornament is using some real blush that I have to give my gnome's nose a nice rosy glow. The next DIY ornaments are these snowmen. The first step is to take a tumbling tower block from the Dollar Tree and paint it white. Once that has dried, it is time to paint the face of our snowman. So I'm adding his black button eyes, some orange paint for his carrot nose, and then finishing off with his smile. I'm using a detail brush to paint, but you could also just use a toothpick. So that our snowman doesn't get too cold, I am making a little scarf for him using ribbon. And I did end up cutting it in half because I thought it was a little bit too thick. And now I'm just using some hot glue to adhere the scarf onto his body. I took a pair of detail scissors I got from the Crafter Square section of the Dollar Tree, and I'm just adding little ends onto his scarf. This picture hanging kit is actually from the Dollar Tree, and the whole entire thing was $1, and it came with quite a few of these O hooks. I'm just taking the O hooks and screwing them down into the tumbling tower blocks and finishing it off with a jute tie so that they can hang perfectly on my Christmas tree. My third rustic Christmas ornament DIY is using a cookie cutter. To begin our third Christmas ornament DIY, we are covering the plastic part of this star cookie cutter in this really beautiful, vintage, kind of rustic looking musical note washi tape. I've seen this cookie cutter being sold for $1 at some of the supermarket superstores, but I actually got this in a whole bag of other cookie cutters too at the Dollar Tree, so it really came out to like 20 cents. Now I'm taking one of these mini bottle brush trees and I'm going to hot glue it and place it in the center of our star ornament. I made a bow for the top of our star ornament with some gold glittery ribbon I got from the Dollar Tree, and then I placed a silver jingle bell at the center of it. To complete this Dollar Tree Christmas ornament, I made an ornament hanger out of jute and hot glued it to the back. The next ornament is a paintbrush Santa. I bought a wood-handled paintbrush from the hardware section of the Dollar Tree and covered it entirely in some red paint. I had to do quite a few layers of the red paint to get it the color that I liked. Now I am putting white polka dots all over the paintbrush using the back of a smaller paintbrush to make those perfect circles. After I had made all the polka dots that I wanted, it was time to make a little hat for my Santa. So to do this, I'm using some scraps from a scarf that I've used on previous projects and just using a hot glue gun to hem it. Now I'm adhering that scarf fabric onto my paintbrush to create my faux Santa hat. I'm using my detailing tool to create 2 little black dots underneath the Santa hat to represent his eyes. I didn't have any floral picks of holly tiny enough to fit onto the paintbrush, so I took some of this sequin ornament filler and I'm trying to create my own holly using the red and the green sequins. I took a white styrofoam ball and painted it red and placed it underneath his eyes to make a little red button nose. Then I shaded in his eyes with some white paint and trimmed his beard to make it a bit shorter. The final step in this paintbrush Santa ornament was to add some jute to the top so that it could hang off the Christmas tree. These wreath ornaments are my 4th rustic Christmas ornament DIY. To start off this ornament DIY, I'm taking a plastic shower ring I got in a 4-pack at the Dollar Tree. Then I'm taking these garland picks and wrapping them around the shower ring. I ended up using about 3 picks to get all the way around the ring. When you're done with that step, your shower ring will look something like this, and it definitely doesn't look like a wreath yet. So what we have to do is take some tiny scissors and start trimming our wreath. Once the entire wreath has been trimmed, I'm now taking some of this really beautiful berry-colored floral garland and wrapping it all the way around the wreath. I held the floral garland in place with a little bit of hot glue to make sure it wouldn't come off, but it was pretty sturdy, so you might not even need the hot glue on that. Then I finish off the wreath with a nice ribbon bow at the top with a little bit of jute wrapped around it. The last step for my shower ring wreath ornament was to add a little bit of jute at the top so that my wreath had an ornament hanger. These stocking ornaments are the last of my DIY Dollar Tree Christmas ornament collection. I'm going to begin this ornament DIY by covering my wood stocking ornament in this musical scrapbooking paper. I am using Mod Podge to apply this, and then I'm smoothing it out with an old gift card so that there are no air bubbles on my ornament. Now I'm covering the back of my ornament with some brown paint, and looking back, I really should have done this step first so I wouldn't get any paint on the scrapbooking paper, but hindsight's 2020. Now is the fun part where we get to start decorating and embellishing our stocking ornaments. I'm taking this burlap trim, the same one that I used on the gnomes in the first ornament DIY, and wrapping that around the cuff of the stocking. Then I added a little bit of garland, and you can see on the other stockings I did jingle bells and a wood star, and on this one I did a pine cone and a bit of holly. Then I'm making the ornament hanger out of some floral wire that I twisted at the top to create a cool texture. And that's all you need to do to complete these stocking DIY ornaments. Homemade Christmas ornaments are a great idea as a gift to friends and family. You can make a lot of them in a pretty short amount of time, and everyone always appreciates a nice homemade gift. My last 6 DIYs for today's video take 2 Dollar Tree items, and I'm going to show you 6 different ways that you can DIY and style them. So first up, we're going to start with the wood tree, and I'm going to show you 3 different ways that you can DIY this. The first DIY is a Christmas napkin holder. The first thing that we're going to do is disassemble this wood Christmas tree piece, and there are 5 pieces, but we're going to end up just using 3 for our DIY. You could also paint this, but because I'm going to be using it as a napkin holder and it might be near food, I didn't want to have any paint in case it was toxic, so I decided to just cover it in some scrapbooking paper instead. Another way that you could also use this wood piece is without even DIYing it. I've seen people use it as a utensil holder, so you could cover it in scrapbooking paper like I am and then reassemble the entire thing together and have it hold your utensils for Christmas dinner. But I really liked the idea of a napkin holder, so I am reassembling this and hot gluing the pieces back into place. I'm just omitting those side pieces, so now our napkins can lay nice and flat in between the 2 Christmas trees. Once the glue has dried, the 2 Christmas trees hold the napkins in between them perfectly. The next project is a DIY Christmas shelf. I'm disassembling my napkin holder, and I'm taking that Christmas tree that I had on the one napkin holder side and hot gluing it on top of the other Christmas tree. A great hack for any hanging DIY project is to make your own hook or holder using a soda can ring tab. To cover up the area where the two trees overlap, I'm taking some garland picks and hot gluing them down over that area. To give the shelf a snowy winter look, I am adding some white paint to the garland to make it look like it snowed, and then I'm also adding a little bit of white paint to shade the outside of the shelf. I added a couple of these white and red berries, and then my shelf was complete and I was ready to start placing some Dollar Tree items on it. I love the way that this candle looked, but I also really liked this LED light up Christmas tree, but I think my favorite had to be when I put the church on the shelf. The final way to DIY the wood Christmas tree decor piece is by using it as a shelf for your elf on a shelf. The second Dollar Tree item is a wood triangle frame. I'll show you 3 different ways to DIY this piece of decor. The first DIY using the frame is a woodland winter scene. You're going to start off this DIY by taking some tumbling tower blocks from the Dollar Tree and painting them brown. Next, we're going to take out the back part of our wood triangle frame. I painted my frame brown because I wanted it to look like a darker wood. Now to set our rustic scene, I am taking some of this white birch scrapbooking paper and I am cutting that out and then Mod Podging it down onto the backing of the wood triangle frame. To smooth out any air bubbles, I'm using an old gift card to just smooth them out and make sure that they're not present. Once the paint has dried, I'm hot gluing the tumbling tower blocks onto the base of our wood triangle frame to give it a little bit of height. Now that our scrapbooking paper is placed onto the back of that triangle frame, I went ahead and put the frame back together by hot gluing it back into place. Now I'm taking some of these Christmas tree figurines from the Dollar Tree and hot gluing those into the woodland scene. Then I thought it'd be really cool to drill some holes into the back of our frame and poke some lights through so that it would kind of look like stars in a rustic nighttime scene. So I'm going ahead and doing that. I am just painting a wood star, which I ended up painting white because I thought it popped more. So although I painted it brown in the clip, I thought the white was just a better look for the overall scene. The second DIY using the frame is a Jingle Bell Tower tree. I took the backing out of the wood frame once again, and then I had some wood dowels, and I probably could have just measured this to figure out the width in between each of them, but I hung a jingle bell from them and just kind of used that as my measuring tool to figure out how many wood dowels I needed and how far apart they should be. It ended up being about 1.5 inches, but it really just depends on whatever kind of bell that you're using. And then I painted the wood dowels in a brown color after I cut them to size, and then I put them aside to dry. I took a set of string jingle bells from the Dollar Tree, but because I wanted them to be hung, I got some ornament wire hangers and I cut them down to size so that they would hang just a little bit on my jingle bell tower, but wouldn't be hitting the other wood dowels beneath them. So once again, depending on the size of your jingle bells and how many wood dowels you want and how you want it to hang, it'll vary a little bit, but you can just really tell by using your eye and trial and error and figuring out how you want your jingle bells to look. Once my wood dowels had dried, I hot glued them into place inside my wood triangle frame. Once you have your wood dowels hot glued into place and the hot glue has dried, you are then able to start hanging up your jingle bells. And how you want to do this or how you want to sort the colors is entirely up to you. I did mine in an increasing jingle bell method and just tried to vary up the red and green as best that I could. The last DIY using the frame is a silver and gold light up tree. I removed the wood dowels that we placed in the previous project, and now I'm taking this picture hanging kit from the Dollar Tree. It's awesome because you get this whole kit for only $1, and it had these O hooks inside, which is what we're going to be primarily using when creating this new project. So as you can see, I opened up the hooks a little bit, and now I am just screwing it into the side of the wood frame. And it was kind of hard to do with just my hands, so I did take a drill to make the initial hole for me, and then the rest of the way I just screwed it in with my hands. And I did this in a zigzag method. The silver and gold jingle bells from the Dollar Tree came with this silver thread, so that's what I'm using to weave through the O hooks. I'm using the same method that I used with the previous DIY to make little ornament hooks for the jingle bells. And first I'm just eyeballing and placing them where I think that they would look best, and then once I've decided where I want them to be placed, I'm adding a little bit of hot glue so that the jingle bells don't move. The final step is adding some of these fairy twinkle lights through the threading and O-hooks as well. This light up tree DIY rounds out our 3 different DIYs using the wood triangle frame. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to see more videos like this one, make sure to hit the subscribe button down below. Until next time, keep searching, keep creating.